Well, Sam Genualdi,
Mhm.
welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now, you, I'm just gonna make this sound for a while. You, you did a little bit of work on my upcoming album, Pictures at an Inhibition, coming out on the 30th of April. I realize I keep saying the 30th of April, even though I'm uploading these interview videos in the month of April. So I don't really need to say April.
That's fair, but people might be listening to it like later, and
Oh, that's a thought. Yeah, they might be going back through and then they'll know, oh, it must be out because he's saying April. That's fair. That's fair. Okay. I'll keep doing it then. I was thinking of just kind of simplifying it down a bit, but that's all right.
cool.
Yeah. I'm just taking a wild guess here. Do you play guitar by any chance?
I dabble.
Yeah, do you?
Yeah.
So, which guitars did you use on the album? Any of the ones I'm looking at here?
Yeah. So there's this one, which is um, the high strung guitar we call
Mm.
it. So it's like, I mean, it's standard tuning. So like all my regular guitar chord shapes work, but
Hmm.
the bottom four strings, the E, A, D, and G strings, are each tuned up an octave. So it's really
Oh, okay.
lovely for like doubling. So what I did in this case was I just doubled Henry's guitar part verbatim with this instrument, and it sits really nicely in a mix because it's not taking up much bottom end of the frequency
Sure.
spectrum, and just kind of gives it a little bit of wideness, which I find really lovely, and I think works nicely in the track.
Yeah, definitely.
And then there's some electric guitar, which I think was this instrument,
Mm.
kind of more or less normal
I
electric
like
guitar.
I like the birds on the frets.
Yeah, this is a recent acquisition that kind of happened by accident. It was expensive, and I kind of ended up with it sort of by accident, and my intention was to sell it to recoup the cost because I was doing a favor for a friend,
Okay.
and then I really liked it, so I kept
Yeah, that's fair.
it.
That's fair. That's cool.
And then finally, I believe the last instrument that I did was this one. Um,
Ah, yes.
so the sort of slide quasi pedal steel stuff going on
Nice.
is from this instrument. And it's a lap steel electric guitar, and it has these levers
Mm.
at the bridge, which allow me to take. So it's tuned to open D, so then I can take my F sharp up to a G and my A up to a B to get a four chord,
Oh,
or
cool.
I can hold them down and have a 5-1 sound because
Mm.
those are inversions of each other, right?
Sure.
Um, yeah, you can just do lots of nice stuff. Put a lot of reverb on it and sounds so beautiful.
It really does. So the track that you played on was "The Face You Make," and I remember we talked a little bit about this before. I had started out with this orchestrational arrangement idea where I reached out to our mutual friend Henry Garrity. I wanted to make it kind of a Lawrence alum thing.
Hmm,
So I
hmm.
said, I know I'll reach out to Henry and he'll do some guitar. And he did some guitar, kind of like you were talking about, kind of down low, doing some bass line stuff. Then my original thought was to have some sort of like melodic instrument doing something on top of that. Reached out to a couple friends who weren't able to, for various reasons, weren't able to collab. And so I reached out to you because not only are you a great multi instrumentalist, but you also write pretty dang good songs yourself. So I knew as far as creating arrangements goes that you have a knack for that. So I kind of just sent you what I had and what Henry had done and said, just do whatever, make this sound like how you would like it to sound. And I think with the guitars that you showed us, and especially that lap steel, which I think again is such a nice touch on that track. It's
Yeah.
got this cool kind of lonesome country-esque vibe to it, which I really dug.
Firstly, just a thanks to you for including me in the project and letting me sort of have my way with the song. One of my favorite sort of roles that I get to do fairly often is, someone sends me like, hey, this is what I have.
Mm-hmm.
100% sure what I'd like you to do, but, kind of go for it. Part of that is why I have, all of these tools at my disposal so that I can kind of follow my whimsy and do whatever inspiration strikes in the moment. And I think when I heard this song, The Face You Make, it was pretty clear right off the bat what I wanted to do.
Mm.
Firstly, it's a beautiful song, and then also Henry had done such a lovely adaptation of sort of your existing structure onto the guitar already,
Mm-hmm.
which left a lot of room for me to sort of be more painterly and bring in these different colors. And so it was just really, really a pleasure to have the chance to do that. And it was fun also because I think sometimes someone sends something and it's a bit of a nut to crack. Like, okay, how am
Mm.
I gonna like make this work? Where are my spots? Like, how is it gonna be? Part of that is oftentimes I get stuff from people who maybe are not, and not that there's like better or worse, but someone maybe who is not like literate musically speaking.
Mm.
And so one nice thing was you were able to send me the lead sheet. So all I had access to all the melody and the chords very directly, which was super nice because I could pick when I wanted to double things and create counter melodies and do that relatively quickly because I could refer to the music.
Sure.
But also just the song itself, I think was for me at least it seemed pretty clear how I wanted to shape it
Mm.
because you had these directions, especially I mean my favorite part of the song I think is the bridge. And it's like
Mm.
the harmony takes a really interesting turn and I really wanted to emphasize that, and in this case actually by like largely dropping out and then coming back in and building it up. And I had like four different colors of highlighters, and I like had each one representing a different voice that I was using. And
Mm.
so I like laid it out onto the music that way so that I could like kind of visually see when I wanted things to grow and shrink. And
Mm, that's cool.
yeah, it was fun.
And talking a little bit about kind of the lead sheets I made for people who may be watching who know a little less about music. As a composer, one of the things I do is I write down music, right? And I not only improvise music and come up with it and record it, I also write out by hand how things are musically supposed to go. I gotta say, with the songs that I write, and this is true with a lot of songs, a lot of popular songs, the melodies, when we sing them, feel very organic and very natural and
Mm-hmm.
not really difficult at all. But then as soon as you try to actually notate and rhythmically write out what's happening, it's an absolute nightmare. And so I really don't enjoy notating or writing down my songs that way. But with this album project, I knew that I wound up collaborating with, I think, 24 people.
Wow.
And I knew, some of the people I was collaborating with have doctorates. And some of the people I know are more fluent in musical improvisation. And some people I know are much more classically oriented and don't really feel comfortable making up stuff, especially in a recorded context where what you're doing is being recorded for all posterity. And so I wanted to make sure that for people who were a little less secure improvisationally, I think that's the word, that there was something notationally for them to hang their hat onto so that they could work off of that and just double if that's what they felt comfortable doing. But it's not a it's not a part of the process that I particularly relish.
Yeah. I've had that experience too of like I'm just singing this part and it just like it feels great. I think it's relatively accessible. Someone else could hear it once or twice and walk away and be able to hum it or whistle it or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And then you start to write it down, you're like, I'm doing like all these weird like everything has to be tied in strange
Oh,
ways to make it legible, and it's like
yeah.
why is this
Yeah, the subdivisions are nuts. Everything's tied across the beat.
hmm.
It's
Yeah.
just an absolute mess to look at. So now when you're not recording for my album, what are you up to? What do you how do your days go?
I'm here in Chicago, Illinois, Andersonville to be exact, and I have my part-time gig, so 3 days a week I am at an electronics repair shop.
Hmm.
Mostly I fix keyboards and drum machines and powered speakers, just various professional music equipment. I'm very grateful to have found that. It's a relatively new thing, and given the current state of, the pandemic and everything, it's been really nice to have that as a working musician. As many, many, many others would attest, things kind of came to a screeching halt, and so many of us have been left without work. So I'm definitely grateful to have something to maintain as we hopefully are moving into a new phase and things are happening again. Immediately prior to that, so like up until mid-March, I was composer in residence for a small nonprofit in Washington State. So I was out there for almost a year writing music and performing and doing different things for this place called Holden Village, which was great, but then it was cut short because of the pandemic. So now I'm
Hmm.
back in Chicago, and the general idea is to put together a career doing freelance music in this town for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So I'm performing as a sideman in different contexts, sort of jazz guitar or guitar in like whatever context,
Hmm.
backing up other singer songwriters, rock and roll bands, whatever, and then doing some stuff like what I've done for you, working on other people's recording projects from the comfort of my bedroom,
That's nice. That's nice.
and then teaching. I'm mostly remote now doing Zoom lessons. So it'd be much like this, except for I'd be telling you to fix the way that your fingers are or whatever. That's been actually really lovely as well. I've
Hmm.
really enjoyed getting to connect to students in that way. I was skeptical of teaching via Zoom, but it's been pretty good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Honestly, I could use someone sometimes to tell me to change the way my fingers are in terms of piano. When I first got to Lawrence, I came in as a soon to be composition major. I
Mm-hmm.
came in composition, that was the thing I was going to do.
Right.
But with the composition major, you have to study your primary instrument for the first 2 years, just in case you don't make the cut at the end of sophomore year. So I did a lot of piano stuff and a lot of piano lessons. Then after I didn't have to do that anymore, I just kind of stopped. I'd play piano every once in a while, but not in the same kind of soloistic classical
Mm-hmm.
mode that I had before. And then it was my second year at Stony Brook, and I decided to take piano lessons again. It had been maybe 5 years at this point since I'd done that. But it was just because I felt like my chops were kind of sliding a little bit. I hadn't like legitimately practiced something in a long time. And so I kind of needed to convince myself that I could still do that. And it was a really beneficial experience. But I remember I was, playing a piece and doing piano stuff with my fingers. My teacher said, "Wow, your fingers are very curved. They're very round fingers." And I said, "Thank you," because that was my understanding of good piano technique. You got to have your fingers curved. It's like you're holding a ball all the time, right?
Uh-huh.
And then she was like, "Well, they don't have to be that way all the time. Like you can play around with where on the finger you actually hit the key, and that can kind of change the attack and the subtlety of the phrasing." And I was like, "Oh gosh." Ooh.
Yeah.
So even now, I'm probably playing with overly curved fingers most of the time. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think regardless of schooling or whatever, but people who would consider themselves to be well into their sort of like career, established for lack of a better word or whatever. I think we all still consider ourselves to be students to some degree and are constantly learning and expanding. That's one of the most exciting things about music to me is that there is no point at which like you did it.
Yeah.
Okay, you learned music, like all right, you know
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so I guess, I mean, I've found a lot of enjoyment from picking up new instruments, but I'm also always working on my guitar playing, and I feel probably a bit overdue to be getting a lesson from somebody. For me, I guess, and maybe like in composition too, it's like you might take a lesson from someone, and it's not that they're gonna tell you like you need to work on your scales more or
Hmm.
whatever. It's much more conceptual perhaps in
Yeah.
nature, at a certain point. But it's always cool to get someone else's take.
I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but I'm very much intrigued because when we were in school at Lawrence, you got a Watson Fellowship.
Mm.
And I don't know if we've talked about that journey of yours where you basically for a year you went to different countries around the world and studied music, which sounds like just the most awesome thing. So where did you go? What musical kind of styles did you study? Tell me about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Watson, for those who don't know, is basically a no strings attached grant for graduating seniors from a number of participating educational institutions.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from the Watson Foundation, as in IBM Watson. Yeah, they give you this grant, this money to pursue what they call a passion project. So 12 months of international travel pursuing whatever it is that you wanted to do. In my case, it was music, but it could have been anything. They've got Watson Fellows who traveled the world and they wanted to learn about different types of cheese from around the world,
Hmm.
or someone from my cohort was really interested in hospice care
Oh,
in different cultural
interesting.
contexts. So it could really be anything, which is fascinating to meet people who have had sort of this like very different experience from yourself, but like in a similar way.
Hmm.
We all meet at the end of the year, and it's this crazy moment of meeting 39 other people who you can empathize with after a year of like being on your own.
Sure. Gosh.
But yeah, so I studied music in 7 different countries. In order, it was Scotland, Armenia, Peru, Brazil, Mozambique, Japan, and Indonesia, more specifically Bali. By the end of it, I did actually fully circumnavigate the globe.
Wow.
um, with a bit of zigzagging in between. But,
Sure.
I left from Chicago and went east, and then
Hmm.
went all the way around and flew back into the States via Los Angeles. There's so much that I can say about that year, obviously, but firstly, I think the most important thing to say is just, how grateful I am to have had the opportunity, and to all the people who helped me out along the way. I learned so much about music, but also about myself and about the world. It's one of those experiences that I'll probably be processing the rest of my life to some
Sure.
degree. Yeah.
There's this great story I heard about the poet E. E. Cummings,
Mm.
where he applied, and only he could do this. Like he applied for a Guggenheim,
Hmm.
and his application was, "I want to write a book of poetry," and they were like, "Sure." But I imagine, I imagine for your Watson, as you were saying, you probably didn't just write, I want to do music. What was your specific kind of focus?
Yeah, so I think that my title was Personal Expansion Through Cross Cultural Musical Collaboration, or
Mm,
something to that effect. And, so I wrote in 3,000 some odd words, which is, the length of the proposal or whatever, that I wanted to collaborate with musicians. I was really interested in this idea that music is really basically a bridge between perceived divides between people, culturally or linguistically, or whatever it is. And the idea was that through cross cultural collaboration, and specifically in music, I could facilitate these dialogues. And I had been collaborating with lots of different kinds of musicians here in the United States who were, from other countries coming here. And so then this
mm,
was to kind of turn that on its head and have me be the one sort of in that position of being an outsider. And then, you know what, the the actual year did not turn out to be very much like what I wrote in my proposal at all.
mm,
And I think that that's also kind of how it is for many Watsons, and that's kind of what the foundation expects too. They're looking for people who are capable of improvising and adapting to what's going on around them. So in reality, it ended up being much more simple. I did all of those things. I collaborated with musicians. I talked to them, and we interacted. But all of these sort of like concepts about, trying to be culturally sensitive and avoiding cultural appropriation, and things like that, like in real world context of like being just like a single person showing up somewhere and trying to be, a kind, friendly human who wants to like interact musically. I can say, like, I never discussed those things with
Yeah.
a single person that I met along the way. It wasn't really relevant because you're there and you're just trying to create genuine relationship with people.
Yeah.
And so in reality, I took a lot of lessons. I learned a couple languages and tried my best to be open as I went
Sure.
and let things happen the way that they sort of would naturally. It went from my elevator pitch to like actually being there, and I was like, wow, this is
A whole different
a
animal.
whole different animal for sure.
Yeah. I went to Japan for a little while to kind of study, particularly how to write for traditional Japanese instruments. And I think, kind of following up on something you said, it's a much different thing if you're the person who's traveled there with a genuine interest and curiosity about a place's traditional culture or traditional music making than if you're, just sitting in your bedroom and thinking, ooh, I like this, and just grabbing and pulling from wherever without really thinking. When it's in the US, it's such a melting, well, not really, well, the term melting pot is kind of sensitive in and of itself. But I think when you're in the US, there's so many people from so many places, you become a little bit more protective of your own kind of heritage and your own identity. That's where these kind of conversations come up. Whereas if you go kind of to the source and show, again, a respectful interest, they're just happy you're interested.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of jarring, like having that experience, that being, like me having been in these places and playing with these musicians, learning from them, living with them, eating with them,
Mm.
all of these things. And then coming back to the US and being told by people who don't know a single thing about it that this is or is not cultural appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to say that cultural appropriation doesn't exist or that it's not a problem.
Certainly.
It would be one thing if I, came home and I'm like, okay, I'm going to capitalize on my, my newfound Mbira ability,
Sure.
try to become really wealthy and whatever off the backs of these people who taught me this music. But I think what you're saying is at the heart of it, is that it's a completely different thing when you're there expressing a genuine interest and seeking that from people. And the other truth is that like everywhere I went, whenever I was like leaving a place that I was at, my teachers and the people that I was playing with and living with and my friends would all encourage me, like, please take this home with you and
Mm.
share. Like, we want more people to know about shamisen, or which is an instrument in Japan, or whatever it was. And it was frustrating to like feel like charged with that responsibility and then come back and feel awkward about doing so because people
Yeah.
are going to like make judgments about what I'm doing. And I'm like, I'm here playing this music not to say that like I'm a culture bearer and an
Mm-hmm.
authority about it. I'm just trying to like share a little bit, and hopefully maybe that'll spark an interest in you and you'll go learn more yourself, or whatever it is.
Am I correct in assuming, maybe not assuming, but recalling that you majored in musical improvisation at Lawrence?
Mm-hmm.
So was that a self-made major?
Yeah, so now Lawrence does offer some of these sort of other tracks in the conservatory. I think it's like the jazz and improvised music. I'm not 100% sure on the verbiage, but
Hmm.
basically when we were at Lawrence, you could either get a performance degree or music ed or composition. So there was basically those options, and then if you wanted to do jazz as more of an emphasis, a focus, they had what was called the jazz emphasis.
Hmm.
And basically what that meant was, okay, you get your classical performance degree, and then on top of that, we'll also have you do, for all intents and purposes, an additional jazz major, but you only get the one degree for it.
Gotcha.
Which, I mean, many people did that, but in a large part, it basically was a crapshoot of what instrument you might play if that was even feasible. So, like for a piano performance major, that would be pretty difficult. Or like saxophone was also like has just a really demanding classical major. So to
Totally.
add that on top of it is really, really tough.
I don't know how Jonathan Fagan survived.
Jonathan Fagan is a superhuman.
Yeah, that is true.
Anyway, so I arrived at Lawrence having been largely recruited by Fred Sturm and Jose Encarnacion,
Mm,
pillars of the jazz department. Fred, who built the jazz department.
yeah.
To whatever degree, I came in somewhat ignorant of the ways that all of that stuff worked, sort of politically in the conservatory, as well as just like the reality of it, like how many classes you had to take to do whatever. So I just kind of showed up and I was like, I'm here to play in the jazz ensembles and this is what I want to do. And then they were like, okay, cool. So you also have to do classical guitar. And I had never played. I mean, I like worked up a couple pieces for my audition or whatever, but like
Yeah.
I was not a classical guitarist. And it felt absurd to me to put 4 years into learning what's essentially a different instrument.
Totally.
I don't know, maybe it's possible, but I would say like largely it's not a good idea to try to become a professional level classical guitar player in only 4 years, not having
Yeah, that's fair.
prior background. It's an unforgiving instrument. And so
And you have to have those weird fingernails.
yeah, and I didn't like that. And my
No.
teacher didn't like the fact that I always cut mine off.
Sure. Yeah.
So I did a year of classical, but I pretty much immediately started having conversations with people about like how can I make this work? I'm
Hmm.
not trying to do exactly this. And ultimately it was presented that it was possible to design your own major. So what I ended up designing was called contemporary improvisation, and it afforded me the flexibility to study with whomever I wanted, more or less. So I took a lot of lessons with Matt Turner, who
Yeah.
was sort of the improvisation guru at Lawrence, as well as composition lessons with Patty Darling and composition lessons with some of the other composition faculty as well.
Hmm.
And then still always taking guitar lessons, and I think I did a term of bass lessons with Mark Ernest. So there was a lot of flexibility to kind of get this more holistic music education for myself, which I felt it resonated more with what I wanted to do musically.
Mm-hmm.
There was some pushback from some parts of the conservatory, I can say. And
Of
it's
course.
funny because, and I'm not going to like name names or whatever,
No, no,
but,
no, no.
but when I ultimately won the Watson, and also that year I was awarded the Downbeat for a composition I did.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden I'm like legitimized or whatever. Like I've got like these people who were kind of sticks in the mud about what I was trying to do coming up to me and saying, "Oh, congratulations. Like this is so great."
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to like pat myself on the back, but I kind of knew what I was trying to do. And I felt like it was appropriate for me to have agency over how I was spending my time and money.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I think that's a larger discussion about music education and education as a whole. But yeah, so that's kind of how that came to pass. And now I'm kind of jealous because they now offer this as like core curriculum, and they've got like a whole music theory sequence designed for people who want to focus on improvisation. And
Sure.
I wish that I had had the benefit of that, but so it goes.
Yeah. When I was a junior, or maybe I was a senior by this point, they split the music composition degree, which was music theory composition,
Mm-hmm.
into a separate theory and a separate composition track. And I was given the option like, well, you can switch to the composition or you can stick with your current theory composition. I was like, well, I'm gonna get both. It's kind of almost like getting 2 degrees now at that point. But I think it is nice the different tracks they've added and the kind of the more specialization you can kind of have at the music conservatory. Just to illustrate for people who may be watching who don't know that much about classical guitar and how distinctly different classical guitar is from what people consider guitar playing. I lived with a friend of mine who was a classical guitarist, and he actually went to Lawrence. And he was an incredible classical guitarist. He was great. He'd play all these leyenda and pieces and stuff. But if you asked him to play an F chord, he wouldn't know what you were talking about. Like, because that's just playing chords is so distinctly different from again, highly notated fingering and classical guitar stuff.
Right.
So and you wouldn't want to come out of a conservatory with a classical guitar degree if that wasn't what you wanted to do,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So,
And I'm grateful for the 1 year of classical lessons that I took.
mm,
Nathan Wysock, who's the classical guitar professor there, is phenomenal, and I really got a lot out of those lessons. But I think that they're more meaningful to me having been sort of as this step along the way and a thing that I worked on amongst many others, as opposed to like something I would have had to slog through all 4 years, probably would have grown bitter about because it was stealing time away from other things I cared about. So I think it worked out best for everyone.
totally. And I'll end on this one last note. But you were talking, and we were both talking about how, you're never too advanced or too old to be taking lessons.
Mm,
And I was watching this interview with Celine Dion,
mm,
who is a very good singer and
mhm,
also like a hilarious person. But she was talking, I think, with Larry King, who was asking her about her vocal warm ups and stuff.
mhm.
And she was talking about, oh, yeah, my vocal coach gives me these warm ups to do. So I do these warm ups. Like she's still studying with someone. She's still got a vocal coach, someone helping her out. And you'd think, she's saying my heart will go on. She's good. She's done. She's fine, maybe.
Yeah.
But she's kind of pushing herself and keeping her voice where it should be, and relying on other people to help her in that progress. So if you're able to, at some point, if you feel like taking lessons, well, both of us teach lessons, so reach out to us first. And then if it's like trumpet or something, like there's someone else for that, I guess. Do you play trumpet?
I do not,
No. Okay. All right.
but I know someone. So
Hey,
so there's that too.
we know we know someone.
Yeah.
Like, chances are, hit us up, and we'll give you some names. Well, Sam, thank you very much for speaking to me this afternoon. You can hear his wonderful guitar and lap steel playing on the face you make, which is on the album that I'm releasing called Pictures and Inhibition. It's coming out on the 30th of April. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool,
Cool. Well, thank you, David. Yeah, it's a pleasure to talk to you and a pleasure to make music with you, and
totally.
more in the future, I know.
More to be revealed.
Almost at a later date.
That's right. Keep. What's the? Stay tuned. That's what it was. It was
Mhm.
like keep tuned, and I knew that wasn't quite right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stay in the loop.
Mhm.
Cool. All right. Ta ta.
Cool. Thanks, David.